Hi, my name is Jeff Hecker. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here at the University of Maine in Orono. It's June 20th, 2013, and I'm going to spend a few minutes with you talking about higher education. And in particular, I'm going to talk about publicly funded higher education. So let me start. It's a surprise to no one, and it's not news, that public education are facing some very serious challenges right now. I'm not sure there's ever been a period in time when public education didn't face some challenges, but these are very serious challenges for publicly funded higher education. The challenges come from a variety of sources. The most significant, and maybe the most important one, is the rising cost of higher education. And I wish I could tell you higher education is going up in cost because of ABC. There isn't a simple answer to why it's going up, but it has gone up dramatically. To give you an example, when I was in college, and I was in college from 1977 to 1981, one could earn and go to a very good state school. One could earn enough money to pay one's tuition and buy books in a summer job. My summer jobs were often being a lifeguard, right? Not making big time money, but I could cover my tuition and books with that amount of money. Right now, that's nearly impossible for people to be able to fund their own education fully at a public university through simple summer work. Here at the University of Maine, where I work, it's about $21,000 roughly per year if you count tuition, fees, room and board, books, etc. I think nationwide it varies. So if you look at that over 4 years, that would be around $80,000. And I think nationwide, if you look, it varies from state to state, but it's somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, maybe a little more at some state institutions, for 4 years of full-time college education. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for anyone to come up with. And so there's pressure. There's pressure on higher education to do this in a reasonable way. Now, I'll make one other quick comment about public higher education. I said I couldn't explain why the costs are so high because there are a variety of factors. But one factor that is clear is that state support for higher education has decreased. And again, I'll just using our state institution as an example, roughly 10 years ago, roughly about 65% of the cost of running the University of Maine was provided by the state. Now that's around 36%. And actually at 36%, we're doing pretty good by comparison to our peers, our peer institutions. The terms that people use, I think, indicate this change. So we were state universities. Then they became referring to ourselves as state-supported universities. And then state-assisted universities. And now I think the term they like is state-affiliated universities, indicating the change. So that's one of the big pressures on public higher ed is the rising costs, and one factor is the drop in state support. Now, there are other pressures on higher education. We all know that information is now so easily readily available online, and education is available online. And so there are private for-profit universities that advertise aggressively for students and offer an alternative to coming to a public higher education. There are also MOOCs, right? Massive open online courses that students can take at no charge. You can take courses in physics from professors at MIT at no fee. You can go online and go to this MOOC. So that presents challenges to public higher education. So what we find ourselves is in a situation where we have to justify our existence, and given the rising costs, people ask questions about, is it worth it? What's the return on investment? And if I'm going to put in $100,000 into educating my son or daughter, is it worth it? How does it benefit the individual? Now, as I mentioned, I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, so one of the most common questions I get from a parent is something like, well, what can my son, daughter do with a degree in fill in the blank? So it might be psychology, English, history, math, because the question is all around return on investment. And that's an important question if you're going to look at these kinds of funding. So in higher education today, the discourse has shifted pretty dramatically, if you look back over even, say, 25 years, toward job preparation. How are we doing in terms of preparing people for the job market? Are they employable? Will they be able to get jobs? And two, are we educating them in the areas that they need, that the country needs or the state needs in terms of employment? So the euphemism now that's used is called alignment. How does the educational curricula at a public university align with the state's needs? How does it align with the jobs that are available? So there's been this increasing focus on jobs and job preparation as an important part, and for some people, the only important part about higher education and the purpose of higher education. Now, there's a couple of consequences of that. Some of it, as I said, is this question that parents ask, and again, it's a reasonable question. Another consequence is there's been pressures in different ways to focus on areas in higher ed that lead to jobs immediately upon graduation. My area of discussion today is public higher education, and there are some state legislatures that are asking that question, saying, well, should we fund education in areas that don't lead to jobs is the concern. Florida is often a leader in this kind of discussion. Their governor said famously something like, how many more anthropology majors do we need here in Florida? Now, an interesting aside, apparently his daughter was an anthropology major, and it led actually to some very interesting discussion about all the interesting things that anthropology graduates are doing for the state of Florida, but that's another area of discussion. What I wanted to focus so what I've talked to you about so far, I consider sort of laying the groundwork for some points that I'd like to make. There's this focus on job training, and that focus has looked, or that as one consequence of that is to look more narrowly at what colleges and universities ought to be doing. The acronym of the times is STEM. There's a focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we certainly need quality education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's a lot of data about the United States in general falling behind other nations in terms of producing people with degrees in those areas. And there's been a call for, an alarm sounded, so that it's saying, hey, we need to do a better job. We need to interest students in that. We need to do a better job preparing them in middle school and high school to be thinking about and have the background to pursue degrees in the STEM fields. And at the public institutions, we better be preparing people in STEM education. And that's all, those are all valid points. And I think that as a nation, we should be focusing on how are we doing in terms of science and STEM-related education. But there's a danger of that, I think, and there's a risk in focusing exclusively on STEM education. As I've mentioned, public support for higher education has decreased. So as it decreases, and as there's this focus on the STEM disciplines, again, very justified, the money has to come somewhere. And so where does it come from? Well, the other disciplines, and the ones that people are most concerned about, myself included, are the arts and the humanities, and to somewhat of a lesser extent, the social sciences. I don't think have suffered as much. But the humanities actually have suffered, maybe a strong word, but they have not been supported at the level that these other areas have. And I think that's a concern for us as a society. I think it's a concern for me as an educator, and concerned about this pulling away and not looking at STEM and arts and humanities, but looking at STEM instead of arts and humanities. Right? So it impacts the way we go about teaching these other areas. It impacts how students' interest in these areas. It impacts the kinds of the quality of people we can attract to work in those areas. So I'm concerned about that. So what I'd like to do is just make a couple of arguments in favor of education in the arts and humanities. And I'll focus probably a little more on the humanities as I go along, but I'll make some parts about the arts as well. So let me start by laying a little groundwork about that. What are the humanities? So when I ask my friends, colleagues, faculty who work in the humanities, they love to give answers like the humanities are what give quality to our lives. The humanities are about what it means to be a human being. I think that's probably my favorite answer. But that is the area of discourse. The area of discourse in the humanities is understanding the human experience. And it's not a single way of understanding the human experience, but it's looking at the human experience through a variety of lenses. So that's the broad definition of the humanities. The sort of narrower or more concrete definition, it's the disciplines like philosophy thinking about the human experience. It's about literature, languages, history, cultural studies, areas that are on the sort of borderlines maybe of the humanities. We might include anthropology, particularly cultural anthropology, clearly. Some of the social sciences, psychology, sociology, are not traditionally considered the humanities, but some of the areas that they study clearly drift in to the humanities. So those are the areas that I'm talking about when I refer to the humanities. The arts, of course, are a little more obvious. It's the performing arts, music, theater, dance. It's the visual arts, painting, sculpture, drawing, printmaking, etc. Why are these areas important? Why should we care? If we're interested in the return on investment, why should we care? So I'm going to talk about why we should care. Why, when I say we, why, again, my area is public universities, why the public should care about supporting these areas. I'm going to talk about it in two ways. I'm going to try to make two arguments for that. The first is about the individual, about the student and their experience and what they get out. And this really, this argument I'm going to make sticks within the framework of what's the return on investment. Why should my son or daughter be an English major or a history major? Or even to take the argument further, why should they study history or English? My child wants to be a nurse. Why should she study history or English? My daughter wants to be a chemical engineer. Why should she take courses in philosophy or a foreign language? So the first part of my answer has to do with that individual and what does it do for them. And I'll stick with my points about employability. Interestingly, when you look at what you talk to employers and look at employers and look what are the skills you're interested in when you hire people. What are the skills that you look at for people who succeed in your company? It's very interesting the kind of answers that you get. There have been several surveys like this, so I'm going to just pull them together. Most typically, the number one type of answer has to do with people who can think in logical, critical ways. People that can use numbers to reason, but that can also reason through an argument. People that can take information and analyze it in a sophisticated way. Critical thinking. What happens in the humanities, right? What happens when a student writes a history paper? A student who writes a history paper that says, in 1812 there was a war. In 1812 the British were in the war and the United States were in the war. That's a D paper, right? That paper just doesn't talk about the War of 1812. The paper that's an A paper, the paper that the student strives to write, and the faculty member tries to develop in the student, is one that thinks about what were the issues that led to this? What were the economic issues? What were the cultural issues? What were even language issues that impacted and made this decision? And what were the ethics of that decision? Who made the decision that human lives would be expended toward this goal? And was that a right or wrong decision? Weighing out those things, that takes looking at information critically, not looking at information and belching it back, but looking at it at it critically. That's what's important to an educated citizen. When I talk with students who are new to the university, and I'm welcoming them and orienting them, I always say, hey, I could ask you a trivia question. Sometimes I'll say, hey, okay, who can tell me what was the name of the ship that Charles Darwin sailed in when he went around the Earth? And pretty much often, no one can get it. I said, now if I gave you your laptop or your smartphone, I could click a timer and I bet one of you could get it within 25 to 30 seconds. Right? It's the HMS Beagle. That's because information is out there. We're in the information age. There's a ton of information. And I say, look, you can get that answer within 30 seconds. Big whoop. So can about 1 billion other people. That's not education. Looking at information and critically evaluating is what we can help you do. And that's what companies are interested in. I'll run through some of the others too. Communication. Companies want people who can write, who can communicate their ideas, who can speak eloquently, who can be persuasive. Companies want people who can think creatively. Now again, not to just have access to information, but to use information in a way that no one else has used it, to put things together in a different way. Companies are looking for people who can work together, working in teams. The big challenges now facing, regardless of the type of company you're talking about, have to be solved in teams. So to work in a team, you have to understand other people. How are they like you and different than you? What are their cultural experiences? How can you communicate with them? Those are the skills that you learn through the humanities. Let me shift from the individual to the broad, and then I'll close out. I think the public should invest in humanities education, not only because it prepares our students to be successful in the workforce, not only for their first job, because we all know that your first job is not your career job. That you can see different estimates, but it's 6 to 10 is the range I usually see of jobs or careers that people will have throughout their lifespan. So you can train them for that first one. Training them for the lifetime is a different thing. But even, say, let's move away from that for a moment. Why should as a society we say these areas are important? And I'll hearken back to someone that we all in the United States know of, and that's Thomas Jefferson. Right? Thomas Jefferson accomplished a whole variety of things, including helping to create our country. But one of the things he was most proud of was creating the University of Virginia, the first public university. In fact, he wanted that on his tombstone, that he'd written the Declaration of Independence and founded the University of Virginia. Anyway, what Jefferson, I jotted it down, what Jefferson said about education, among other things, he said, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for survival of a free society. And I love that, because that is very true. We need educated people to make wise decisions. The humanities provide an important focus for that type of education. The humanities, again, as I've already said, help people to learn how to think critically. So that when a leader, a democratic elected leader, or a leader of a company says, this is the way things are, a critical thinker asks why, and what's your reasoning for that, and can you explain it to me? Not persuaded by the personality, but persuaded by the argument. And that's essential to a successful democracy. But a democracy, particularly in a country like ours, with the complexity and the diversity involved, we need to be able to understand other people's experiences. Right? So if I'm interested in rural poverty, for example, and I read a bunch of statistics about how people who grow up poor in rural areas have higher teenage pregnancy rates, smoke at higher levels, have higher levels of obesity, and are less successful in the job market. That's fine, I get that information. If I read The Beans of Egypt, Maine, I understand that in a whole different way. I understand that experience of being rural poor in a different way. And I think that helps me to be an empathic citizen who can participate in a democracy with people who've had that type of experience. One other way, again, that I think it's important for a democracy, that people have an education beyond the job training. If you think about history, and you think about where we are in our context for our experiences, if you don't have a view of where you've come from as an individual, but also as a society, the things that we've gone through, the steps that we've taken, the changes that we've experienced, it's hard to understand the human experience now. If you look at race relations in the United States right now. And one might say we have an African American president, everything is fine, right? But that's a very narrow view about the relationships among races. Expand a little wider, it was only 50 years ago that African Americans couldn't drink from the same water fountain or use the same lavatory as Caucasian Americans. Go back further, and of course we have an ugly scar of history, of slavery in our history. So putting our experiences in context historically is essential for understanding things. So I will close by saying public education is facing extreme challenges today, but I hope we don't respond to those challenges by eliminating the things that might seem as peripheral, but I would argue are central.